everyone, Saga. I'm back. I've taken a little bit of semi-retirement, but I've decided I was too young, so I'm here again making another video. Do you like the new background? Very interesting, isn't it? But it means you'll pay much more attention to the real gem of this scenery, which is, of course, this. Now, this is my GHK AKM. I did a video a little while ago called 2 years on or something to that effect. What I thought I'd do today, instead of just doing a 3 years on or 4 years on or whatever it is now, I've actually upgraded all the internals to steel made by W&S. So I thought what we do today is actually take a look at those, because there's a few videos on the internet about how to install them, but not really an in-depth look and a discussion about them. So she's still looking nice as ever. The cleaning rod is currently going to be discovered by some archaeologist in the New Forest in like 200 years time, because it came out and went walkies. Not that you really needed it. It's metal, so you shouldn't really be using it anyway. Other than that, she's still going strong. So I'm going to talk about it a little bit today, and I'll show you some of the original parts compared to the new bits that are in there. And we'll have a bit of a discussion about whether this is worth doing. Right, here we are again, back on the legendary Zeltbahn. So before we look at the W&S replacements, I thought we'd have a quick gander over the original parts. Now these are all stock GHK parts. These are not all of the bits you would be removing to replace. These are just the relevant bits that are worth looking at. And obviously the pins that actually hold the trigger mechanism in, you're going to use again. Those aren't replaced. Neither are all of the springs, but it does come with stronger springs. You don't have to use them, of course, but I would recommend it because some of the bits weigh more. So they're also new springs, so there's no reason not to use them. So something which will go, and we will see why in just a little, is the plastic buffer. So this is the plastic buffer, which is what allows the half travel to essentially work. With the standard parts, you need this in, otherwise you're going to have problems. This basically covers the straight ledge at the back of the receiver in the lower half, and if you don't have this on, the bolt carrier will collide into that and cause various issues, so you need to use this. So this is the hammer. I don't know how many thousand rounds it's been through, but it's definitely a lot. I've skirmished this gun a number of times. I've shot a lot of rounds both at games and in houses and at the range, so that's sort of the condition you can expect. You'll see there's a lot of wear, like visual wear. Most of this is just wear on the finish. This is perfectly normal, so don't be alarmed if you see this happening on any hammer you have installed. That's normal, but this is held up fine. No issues with that. So those two bits are all good. Now this is where things are a little bit different with the WS, and once again I'll show you why in just a moment. But the way this assembly sits together with the original is you have the trigger, of course, and then the sear is going to sit here, and there's a little hole there for this spring to sit in, so it's always got tension on it, and they just sit together like this. Now this is actually a 3-part assembly on the GHK, but on the W&S it's a 2, which is quite good because they've essentially simplified the design, so it's got less parts, and that's less parts is always a good thing. So this here is not sure exactly what you'd call it. I suppose it's the auto lever, or it's essentially the part that will drop the hammer, prevent the hammer dropping and therefore the gun firing if the bolt is out of battery. It's essentially what it does, and I'll show you how these bits work on the replacement, so just so everyone's familiar, because we're going to have an in-depth look at the actual trigger group basically. This is the what I suppose you would refer to as the firing pin. This is what physically hits the release valve on the magazine, which is of course this, or the rocket. So this slides up, this slides up like this, and then when you actually cock the action, this will return slightly when you pull the trigger, of course. So that part is also in fine condition, no issues there. So yeah, these can still be used as far as my particular lot. They do have slight wear, but overall they're still going strong. Something that will eventually go, which is quite common, is this piece here, which is what controls the full auto and the sear. This will sometimes break. I've heard that happening. Or you get one of these surfaces here, which is what essentially locks over when it catches the hammer on semi. One of these will break. What's also interesting about this is this has 2 hooks. The W&S only has 1. But where it's all one piece, I suppose, maybe they decided that was more rigid. It's also steel, so You don't really need two necessarily. That's just what they decided to do. So that concludes a look at the GHK parts. In terms of the bolt carriers, they're pretty much the same. It's just one's made of steel. The bolt carrier hasn't really changed in condition from my last video. So you will strip this down in the usual fashion. This time it's now more realistic due to the exclusion of this additional buffer piece, which of course is not present on a real steel AK. So you've now got the same number of parts until you get the bolt carrier out, and then obviously things will start to be a little different. So you remove the top cover. I've already cleared the gun, by the way, in case any safety people are freaking out. So you're going to then push forward on the return spring, which is now a realistic two-piece guide under the spring. You lay that down, pull the bolt carrier back, lift it up and out just like you would the real steel, and lay that down over here. After that, you're going to do as you did before, lift up on the gas tube, rotate the lever there, and the gas tube comes right off and you lay that down. You don't have to remove this unless you actually have to clean it. So these are your four main parts once you've field stripped the AK. So your top cover is just a top cover, nothing changes there. So this is where the recoil spring is different. On the original GHK it's shorter and it has a one-piece guide inside the spring. This has a more realistic two-piece, so it will flop around. It's much longer and much stronger because obviously it's got to deal with the now additional weight of having a steel bolt carrier. And the construction of this has also been simplified over the original, which is a nice touch. Something I added to this was the so-called rapid fire kit, but I modified it slightly. Normally it will sit further forward, but what I did was Dremel the ledge off. I saw a guy on YouTube, I forget the name, but whoever you are, if you see this, thanks very much, great tip. He Dremeled this edge off, and what I actually did was cut a slightly weaker spring. This one will actually flex. I say weak, it's actually strong as hell, it's from a VSR. I cut that shape, put it on there. What this allows is you can maintain the original rate of fire with like a heavyweight bolt carrier. Obviously it's not going to be quick as the stock carrier because the stock GHK carrier is very light indeed. But what this allows you to do is still have the relatively full travel. I think it's about 4mm off being full travel, you know, true full travel, which is like 118mm or something like that on the real AK. So it's only slightly off that. But that's worth it in my book. For the same reason that the half travel system exists on the standard GHK, it's just more efficient because the bolt is going to be a bit quicker, but you're still going to have the benefit of having more travel, and you've also got steel. Because this is steel, it's better to have it impact on something. What is usually attached to this, if you don't buy this additional piece and then put a spring over it, is this little plastic buffer, which essentially sits like this. That will absorb the force because it is plastic, so it's technically doing the same job as the original piece, but it's obviously far smaller, and they sit like this, of course, and that allows the bolt carrier to travel back further. When you're using this, the semi-auto is okay, which is pretty much all I use anyway. Full auto is just for fun when you've got this, because you know it's a lot heavier action. But on full auto, it is a little sluggish with this, so that's also why I recommend this. And even on semi, you're going to get like a snappier recoil impulse. I'll probably devil hunter mod this at some point because I think with this heavier setup, it's probably the way to go. Moving along then, this is the new bolt carrier. What's good about this is this part of the gas piston and the body of the bolt carrier are all one piece. On the GHK, it's threaded here, so you have to Loctite that, and it's also threaded here. On the W&S one, it is only threaded where the silver part of the piston begins, and the reason for that is in the kit is included the short piston. So depending on whether you've got an AKM, AK-74, something with a full length gas tube like this, you're going to be using this one. If you've got the AKS-74U, obviously the short gas tube, you're going to want to attach this. So they've included both, so you can thread those on to the corresponding length of your rifle, which is really nice. So you don't have to buy a separate kit If you want to change it from one gun to another at some point, you can just re-thread that in and Loctite it. Make sure you Loctite this though, guys, because this thing has quite substantial amount of kick, especially on CO2. So that things will get loose if you don't have them tight. This is still the same nozzle, it's in great condition, not had any problems with it. It's the FG adjustable one with the grub screw mod right there. Now, something I want to know is that when you are using the W&S full travel kit and the steel bolt, something that's very important is the fact that it's going to require high PSI to function well, so CO2 or black gas. You're going to want to have an adjustable nozzle because obviously more PSI means more FPS. So you should have one anyway, but especially if you're using this with the stronger gases, you're going to want to make sure there's a way to regulate that through temperature and gas changes and things like that. So very important. Other than that, if we're looking at the sort of wear, now this actually isn't wear. I polished all these surfaces up to 1000 grit, so they're just super smooth. The trigger group especially, it did need a little bit of, I'd say, hand fitting to actually work properly. You just need to polish surfaces because this does have quite a gritty texture and the trigger group parts are the same. Bit of a pain, I don't know why they did that. I know it's technically corrosion protection, finish and everything, but still you're going to want to file some of that off. As long as you keep grease on it, which you should anyway, then you're not going to have a problem. You can probably see if I turn it in the light there, this whole part of the piston here is lightly greased. You want to do that because, as you can see there, it essentially scratches inside the housing which sits under the rear sight, that part of the gas tube. It scratches on that, so keep it lubed. Any metal on metal contact you want to keep lubed. So obviously these guide parts here slide in the receiver, so you're going to want to keep oil on those, and the underside here, because this is essentially, when the hammer's in the gun, this is coming back like this and scraping on it. So you're going to want to put some oil on that especially. This is very nice construction though, it's very solid. You can now go ahead and use those add-on cylindrical cocking handle additions for the AK without the worry of it snapping off, because that's quite a common problem on the zinc alloy GHK carriers. The gas tube, obviously you don't have to change anything. It just rolls inside like it always does. But like I say, it does scratch, so make sure you put some lube on that because it scratches on the inside of this. This you don't really have to because it's narrower, but you're going to have to lubricate this part. Time for some close-up action then. So you're of course looking at the right side of the receiver. I'll turn it over, you can see right into the trigger group, which is currently cocked. So main differences here. As I mentioned, the hooks I showed from the stock GHK, so this part, has now been altered on the W&S system to only have one hook, which you can see just there. Now that's holding on to the hammer, so if I push that you'll be able to see how that's blocking right there. And that is also of course the sear right there. Now the auto lever, or the out of battery lever, whatever you want to call it, this part, this is what stops the hammer from dropping if the bolt is not in battery, which right now it isn't because of course it's not in the gun. So what will happen when I pull the trigger, it will be stopped by this, like that. Now if I were to push this forward whilst pulling the trigger, it now drops the hammer because it thinks the bolt is in battery. So that's essentially how that works. So if I install the bolt carrier, I can now demonstrate how this works on automatic. So for example, it's now on semi, and of course it will drop, but if I put it on full auto and I pull the trigger, obviously the action would cycle, and as soon as the bolt's in battery, the hammer goes up again because it's tripped that auto lever. So that's how that works. Other differences in the system, you are going to have a slightly different trigger pull. Now this has got the steel trigger as well, which is also a slightly different shape, and as Bada Bing pointed out on his YouTube channel, it's actually a more realistic shape, which is nice. So if I remove the bolt carrier and I insert a magazine, which does have gas in, so I'll be careful not to pull the trigger. So you can see there, that's where the firing pin sits. At the moment, of course, it's cocked. If I were to push this forward and pull the trigger, it would expel all the gas out, so I'm not going to do that. What I wanted to point out here was obviously the last round stop. Now, the way this works is this magazine currently has the dry fire switch on. So with the magazine removed, we can now see this a little more clearly. This is the last round stop. What this essentially does is when the follower comes to the top, because the magazine is empty, this will sit in a little channel right there, which will essentially mean the hammer will only drop, and you'll just about this much, and you'll just hear a little click. When you insert a fresh magazine and you cock the action, the hammer will reset and this will drop back down into its position, allowing you to fire again. It's slightly simpler than the original GHK bits, shall we say. They definitely feel a lot more sturdy, and of course they are made of steel. Now, the way the selector works for the safety is exactly the same. So right now, it's in single shot. Apologies, I'm trying to keep this on the view. Down here, of course, we have this plate. This is what physically blocks the sear, and it holds it in different positions. On full auto there, it will stop it traveling fully, and on safe, which is at the top, it will move up onto the cam slope, and that basically means you can't pull the trigger at all because it's not allowing this rear end to move up. When you have it on the semi, it's tilted all the way back and not at all covering this system, so you can see that plate moving in the back there, right here. So that has remained the same. So that's a little look at the trigger group and what some of the parts do in that and how they actually work. So the first thing you're going to reinstall, of course, is the gas tube. Make sure your lever is level with the rear sight, so to speak, not tipped over that way, otherwise you'd be there all day. So just stick that in. That goes on. Close that. Grab your bolt carrier. Make sure the nozzle is in the rear position, otherwise it's going to get hung up on things. Stick your piston in, just like you normally would. Slide that forward. At this point you're going to reinsert your nice flippy floppy return spring back in there, which sits in the little groove like it does in the real place in the back there under spring tension. Last thing, just going to reinsert, or install should I say, your top cover. Now something to note actually, which I think I'll point out, some of these, at least my one, it doesn't like to click over without a little bit of help. So if that's the case, you see here, if you just put your thumb under where the square part of the button is, as you're installing the cover, this will allow the cover to actually sit in a place where it's now over it. There you go, a couple of taps and she's on. So now you're going to do a quick function check as you always would, right? Check the safety work, which it does. You can see if it's cocked or not because you'll see the hammer is down in the receiver. So you're going to pull the trigger, rack it. Now the trigger should reset, which it did. Switch it to full auto, just make sure that's working. Obviously the first time you install these parts you're going to want to check all this. Hammer should drop, clock the action, and now the hammer should only drop when the bolt returns all the way forward, which it did. Great, we're all sorted. So the GHK bolt carrier, if we're going to use the cocking handle as a reference, will stop about here. This one will come back further with the addition of it being steel. Now, if you do not use the return spring I showed here, in fact, get the cover off again so you can see that. If you do not use this addition of the spring here and you use this little piece, then your travel is obviously gonna not end here, but about here. However, as we mentioned, it will make the bolt a little more sluggish. It's all down to your taste really in terms of which one you go for. I like the thing to be a little bit snappier. If that means I get slightly less travel, then fine. I'm willing to sacrifice a tiny bit of realism for better performance. Something I do recommend, however, is definitely go for the the Devil Hunter mod. I've used the Devil Hunter mod one, and the difference is excellent. You get much better efficiency because obviously CO2 is a much higher PSI, especially if you're going to use steel parts. You're adding a lot more weight to the system, and also the dwell time is longer, so you're using more gas per shot, so to speak. So let's have a little look then. This is loaded up with new prol. It is a bit chilly in here, which is not the optimal conditions for this gun, but we'll just see how the travel looks. So the recoil is substantially more than usual. If I just hold it without putting any force, it does move a lot. So we look at the full auto. Very nice indeed. So if I just hold this down, this wasn't a fully loaded gas charge or anything. And obviously guys, make sure your weapon is empty before you do this, especially with solid walls in your house. But if I just hold the trigger down till it runs dry, we'll see how long of a burst we get on what was about a 4-second charge in 13 degrees. And we're out. And that was with black gas. So with CO2 you'd have even better efficiency. And if it was a little warmer it would have worked better still. But even that, pretty good. This is why I'm stressing the importance of using use a good gas. If you use like standard green gas, it's just not gonna work as well unless it's right in the middle of summer. A problem I did have, the firing pin here was slightly problematic. What would happen, now this also used to happen on like the first gen GHKs, when you inserted a magazine, if you did it slightly slowly, so if you went like this, it would like fire a shot because the actual firing pin had not retracted properly and it had pushed on the rocket valve as it was installed and released some gas enough to fire a shot. So the weapon's still cocked, they're still around in the chamber. I removed a partially loaded magazine and inserted a new magazine. What would sometimes happen is it would just fire, simply filing with some material off the sides of the firing pin so it's not so tight in the actual hammer. I'll just grab that so you can see what I mean. So basically it rides in this slot here. If I put my hand behind it you can see it better. It rides in that slot there, and basically it was too tight. So what was happening is it couldn't always retract properly when the hammer was back, and I think that was, it must have been that, because as soon as I took material off it on the sides, it then didn't happen anymore, and I've never had the problem since. So that's the way to solve that if you're having that problem. Just join the GHK owners group on Facebook as well. There's always plenty of guys that are willing to help you out on there. Something I've also done to the gun, which doesn't directly relate to W&S, but I've replaced the bucking with a PDI W hole because I had wonderful experiences in my other guns with those, and oh boy is it wonderful. It's a very, very good hop rubber, although they're going to start getting more expensive now sadly because of what's happened to PDI recently. I've got a rather nice chamber on this gun, so if I just strip it down again so you can see that. This here, I'll just zoom in rather crudely, might I add, but this here is the hop chamber. This is the FG ball screw adjustable hop chamber. If you can find one of these guys, get it, because it's amazing. It essentially adjusts like the SRS with 2 Allen keys, and that to me is just a far better system because it kind of acts like a maple leaf where it's now putting pressure on in a concave shape rather than just straight down. So that's worth doing as well if you can find that. So I guess that concludes everything I want to discuss about this. Is it worth doing? It's not necessary, no, absolutely not at all. The standard gun with just whatever brand, whether it's Simoon or FG heavy bolt, whatever, will work just fine with the half travel. It's really down to the fact if you just really want steel parts for longevity and you want to have full travel and you're willing to devil hunt and mod it. A lot of it comes down to, it's just taste and money, basically. If you have the taste for it and you have the money to do it, then yeah, no reason not to. You'll just have to be a bit more mindful of pressures and things like that. Obviously, if you're going to devil hunt and mod it, make sure you put the right valves in. Don't just start putting CO2 in standard valves, because they won't hold. The nice thing about GHK mags though is they use essentially the same gas cylinders, so it's easy to convert them over by changing the valves out, which I will do at some point. It's very nice and it does make a nice bit of difference. So that concludes a nice little look at that. Alright, well, thanks for watching guys. Hope you enjoyed that little presentation there. And if anyone does have any further questions, please throw them straight in the comments and I'll do my best to answer them when I can. Also, feel free to rate, comment, subscribe for more content. There will be more things on the way soon. I don't think I'll leave it as long this time, but we'll see how it goes. Take care guys.